Hey, what is going on guys? RvzStealth here, and in today's video, we're going to be taking a look at the best junglers for patch 7.1. So the way I'm going to do this video is I'm going to group the champions into a tier 1, a tier 2, and then a tier 3. We're going to go over the tier 1 champions and go into detail as to why they are pretty strong picks right now, and then I'll briefly touch on like why the champions are in the tier 2 and in the tier 3 category. So with that being said, let's get into the video. So starting it off here, the first champion in the tier 1 category is going to be Shaco. So even though Shaco did receive a little bit of a hot fix in patch 6.24, I still think he's a really strong pick in the jungle. It did take a few patches for people to start to understand like how to play the new Shaco. When he first got the mini rework, I feel like a lot of people were still going AD Shaco, but the AP Shaco build started to catch on, and it's actually a really strong build on him. I know that he did get a hot fix in patch 6.24 to where they reduced the AP ratio a little bit on his Q and on his Z, so I'm not sure if AD or AP Shaco, which one is better right now. I assume AP is still better, but he does always have that versatility of going AD or AP Shaco. If your team is lacking like AD damage, then you don't have to build AP Shaco every single game, so it does make him a pretty versatile pick. He actually does have legit one-shot potential though, which makes him just a super hard champion to play against. If you get a snowball going as Shaco, then the enemy AD carry will not be surviving a single team fight, especially if you have your Q at rank 5 to where it's a 4.5 second stealth. And keep in mind that you can't reveal Shaco anymore with control wards, so he can stealth for 4.5 seconds. The enemies won't be able to know where he is. Then he can just come out of stealth and one-shot the enemy AD carry, so it's so frustrating to play against a good Shaco if he does get ahead. And then for when and when you should not pick Shaco, try to pick him more against a low mobility enemy team comp if you can. If the enemy team does have someone like an Ezreal and like a Corki, or just champions that do have gap closers, it is going to be a little bit harder for you to be effective on Shaco because you're probably going to be taking that ignite, and once you do jump in with your Q, you don't really have another way of like gap closing to your target. So if you don't one-shot them instantly, then they're probably just gonna be able to get away from you every single time, unless of course you do get really fed and then you can just one-shot them. And also try to avoid Kayle and Zilean because these champions can do a really good job at countering you, especially if it does get to mid to late game. I feel like Shaco, like if you can snowball with him right now, then it doesn't really matter what you pick him into. But if the enemy team does have like a Kayle or a Zilean, then picking one of the other junglers in the tier 1 is probably a better idea, since those champions can kind of completely negate what Shaco wants to do. The next champion here in the tier 1 is going to be Ive Earned. So like Shaco, Ive Earned did receive a hot fix in 6.24, but he is still a really strong jungle pick. He's kind of just like a spam shield to win jungler. He's one of the only like support junglers in the game, to be honest, and it just makes him a pretty easy pick to play. Once you do get around like 10 to 15 games on Ive Earned, he becomes pretty simple, and he's definitely a very effective jungler. He's got a super fast mid-game power spike, which makes him a great pick too. His synergy with Redemption and Athene's and Locket is just really good right now, and it just allows him to pump out really good shields in team fights, and it's just gonna allow him to keep his AD carry and his team really healthy and really safe. He's also great if you do get ahead with him. I'm pretty sure Ive Earned has one of the highest, if not the highest win rate right now if you do end up ending the game before the 25-minute point, and that just shows that his early game is super strong. He can go for that cheese level 1 invade and end up 3 buffing the enemy jungler, and he can also look for a cheese level 2 gank. What you want to do with Ive Earned is you want to apply your passive like on your 2 camps. You want to try to invade the enemy's buff and then look for a gank right after that, and a lot of the time the enemies just won't expect it. If you do have like a CC champion that you're ganking for as well, chances are you will pick up first blood with him. And then as for when you should not pick Ive Earned, I would look to pick him if you do have an AD carry who is fairly immobile. So someone like a Twitch or like even a Vayne. Vayne does have the gap close with her Q, but Ive Earned is really good with these AD carries who have a lot of damage output potential like in a mid to late game team fight, but don't always have like the best ways of staying safe. So like a Jinx, a Twitch, a Vayne, Ive Earned's really good with them because he can keep them really safe in team fights. And I would not look to pick him though if your team does have a passive support. I found that picking Ive Earned with someone like a Janna or a Soraka just doesn't work out most of the time, because if the game does end up going to late game, then you're not going to have any reliable engage, and you just provide no damage with that combo either. So if your team does fall behind, it's going to be very hard for you to carry with Ive Earned. Next up here in the tier 1 is going to be Shyvana. So Shyvana is kind of a polar opposite to Ive Earned because she does a lot of damage and she is definitely one of the best like solo carry junglers right now. If you get ahead with Shyvana, you can constantly keep invading the enemy jungler, and the enemy jungler pretty much won't have any farm just because you clear camps extremely fast with your W and with your E, and it just makes her a great pick in this new season. She definitely is one of the fastest clearing junglers, so it allows her to get to that level 6 really fast, and it just allows her to gank a lot more than some of the other junglers can. She does have great dragon control too. When you do hit level 6 as Shyvana, just look to ult over that pit and try to take dragon. Just get a control ward, because you can take dragon extremely fast with her, and it's just a very effective way to get your team ahead in the early game, especially if that is an infernal drake. Then just look to take it at level 6 because it's very easy to do with her. And then the mini rework, it definitely did help her out a lot. I think that she was a pretty decent pick like before her rework, just because of the way the new jungle worked, but after she did get her rework, she definitely is one of the top tier junglers now. For when you should not pick Shyvana, don't pick her if your team does lack reliable engage. Shyvana's engage isn't the most reliable because you can't really, like, you don't have a CC ability that you can use to lock down the enemy AD carry or mid laner. You can dive in really well and you could get onto the back line, but you can't really lock that champion down for your team to follow up. And then also try to avoid Janna, Ive Earned, and Rammus. Janna can do a really good job because she's got great disengage. Ive Earned also does have pretty good disengage against you, and then Rammus can just taunt you and make you completely useless in a mid to late game team fight, so avoid those champions if you can. The next champion here in the tier 1 is Hecarim, and Hecarim is probably one of the best overall junglers that you can pick right now. He's great with Courage of the Colossus. He's super strong because he's pretty much a full tank jungler, yet he can still deal so much damage. You rush Trinity Force on Hecarim and you can pretty much one-shot like the enemy squishy targets. After Trinity Force, you can go full tank and you can still end up dealing so much damage. He also can snowball really good, and he does have a great early game. You do take Ghost on Hecarim, and because that is on a very short cooldown, it just allows you to pull off really effective ganks in the early game. Definitely look to gank a lot with Hecarim. Whenever your Ghost is off cooldown, you should be looking for a gank because they're just very easy to pull off, and it's pretty much a guaranteed kill if you do have like red buff and you have your Ghost up. If the enemy's pushed to around like halfway, like say the top laner's pushed halfway, then you should be able to pick up a kill like 99% of the time. He's also great against the low mobility champions that are being played right now, so look to pick him if the enemy team doesn't have many gap closers. And he can also do pretty well against peeling the champions that do want to dive onto his back line. So if the enemy team does have a dive comp or a comp that just wants to get onto your AD carry, then Hecarim is also not a bad choice in that situation. And then for when you should not pick Hecarim, I think he's a great jungle pick right now. So if he's not banned and you know how to play him, then I would definitely look to pick him. But if you can, I would try to avoid heavy disengage. So someone like a Poppy or Janna can do pretty well against Hecarim. If you do try to dive in on the back line, then you could just get Poppy ulted out or Janna ulted, and then you're kind of useless from there on out. And then to round out the tier 1 champions here is going to be Vi. So I think that Vi and Hecarim are probably the two best junglers that you can play in this patch. Vi's got really strong engage, probably some of the best lockdown for any jungler in the game. Her ganks are really strong in the early game and at level 6. You can definitely gank very well at level 3 or even at level 2 with Vi with your Q, because it does provide the knockback, and if you do gank for a lane that does have crowd control, then you should be able to pick up first blood a lot of the time with Vi. She does have very versatile build paths too. You can go pretty tanky on Vi if you want to. You can also go assassin Vi and like one-shot the enemy champions. I think the best build though right now for Vi is going bruiser, so going warrior, Trinity Force, and then tank after that seems to be what's working best on her for this patch. She's also great at isolating that fed carry on the enemy team. A lot of the time in solo queue, you'll be playing jungle and you'll get your top lane and mid lane ahead, but your bot lane just ends up feeding super hard. Well, when you're playing Vi, that doesn't honestly really matter too much, because if the enemy AD carry gets fed, you can just point and click R on them in a team fight, and if they're the only one fed on the enemy team and you've got your top lane and your mid lane ahead, then it's gonna actually be pretty easy to win that game. You just press R on the AD carry, use your Q after that, and they're gonna be completely useless in pretty much every single team fight. And she is also great right now in this meta of a mobile AD carries and mages. And then lastly, when should you not pick Vi? So I would look to pick her if you do lack engage or if you do lack lockdown. She is one of the best engaged junglers that you can play right now. I would try to avoid Morgana and Janna if you can. Morgana can do a really good job at countering you with her black shield and her bind, and then Janna obviously has her ultimate, which you can use to just knock you out of a team fight. And now taking a look at the tier 2 champions for this patch, these champions are going to be Zac, Nocturne, Kha'Zix, Rengar, Evelynn, Graves, and Skarner. So honestly, I would probably put Zac, Graves, and Skarner in like a tier 1.5, like a little bit below tier 1, but a little bit above tier 2. So a common theme to these champions are that they are really strong if they get ahead, but they're really weak if you end up not having a very strong early game with them, or if you fall behind. So that's kind of why they're not in the tier 1 category. For example, like Evelynn, Nocturne, Kha'Zix, they can all just destroy the early game and snowball a game out of control, but they can also be kind of completely useless if they do end up getting out jungled, or if they don't have the best early game. They are going to get outscaled come the late game by some of the champions like on my tier 1. For example, a Vi is going to be a lot more useful like in a late game team fight than someone like an Evelynn will be, because Vi has her ultimate, whereas Evelynn, she doesn't really have that way to lock down the enemy AD carry or mid laner unless she does get a really good flank off. And then for the champions in the tier 3 category here, these are mainly champions that are really good in certain situations, but they're not tier 2 and they're not tier 1, because I would only pick them in those certain situations. So these champions are going to be Rammus, Amumu, Sejuani, Lee Sin, Olaf, Kayle, and Elise. So for Lee Sin and Elise right now, I would only pick them if you practice them a lot and you have a lot of games on these champions. Lee Sin is getting a nerf this patch too, so I feel like you should only play him if you're really good at the champion. For Rammus, you should really only pick him if the enemy team does have like a lot of AD champions. The meta right now is fairly AD heavy though, so he is a great pick in a lot of situations, but because like I just wouldn't pick Rammus into like a double AP comp or a heavy AP comp, that's why he isn't like tier 2. And then for Sejuani and Amumu, I feel like their early games are just a little bit too weak right now for them to be like tier 1 or tier 2. Right now in this meta or in the new jungle, it's very easy for them to get invaded and just fall really far behind in the early game. And because it takes a lot longer this season for the camps to respawn, if they do end up losing like 2 or 3 camps early, then it's going to take them a lot longer to get level 6 and they're just going to be very far behind. And lastly, for Olaf and Kayle, right now Olaf kind of lacks that good keystone mastery, which is keeping him from being tier 2 or tier 1. For Kayle, I've seen some really good Kayle jungles recently, and I feel like this champion does have a lot of potential in the jungle, but I haven't seen enough of her to really place her tier 2 or tier 1. She does have a weaker early game when it comes to dueling, so she can get invaded pretty easily and just out-dueled. But if you do end up like being able to farm in the early game as Kayle, and you can get to mid to late game, the Blood Razor along with Nashers and with the Rage Blade, those 3 items are insanely strong on her, especially with the Rage Blade buffs a few patches ago. So right now, if you know what you're doing on Kayle, and as long as you can prevent the enemy jungler from invading you, then she is a pretty solid jungle pick. So that is going to be all for this video, guys. If you did enjoy, then be sure to leave a like and subscribe if you have not already. I'll be coming out with a top lane list probably tomorrow, or not, if not tomorrow, in the next few days, so be sure to watch out for that one. But with that being said, guys, thanks for watching, have an awesome day, and I will see you in my next video.